Of all the components that go into capturing a vocal performance, obviously the mic is the single most important piece of gear. It all starts there. A good quality mic may not be able to guarantee a great performance, but if well chosen and properly utilized by the recordist, it can guarantee a good, clear, detailed recording, so when that great performance does come along, it will be captured in all its glory. Since the mic and mic-related considerations are so key, I'll devote the first half of the course to mic-related issues, with the second half touching on other important topics. Now, when it comes to mics, many experienced studio engineers are probably a bit spoiled, especially ones that work in larger facilities with their well-stuffed mic closets full of high-end vintage models, the very ones that are part of the history of recording. They may have the enviable luxury of choosing from among these classic mics, and it's hard to go wrong with that kind of toolbox at your disposal. But at the other end of the spectrum, lots of small studio practitioners aren't faced with as many choices when it comes to the mic for their next vocal session. In fact, many times they may not have any choice at all, simply using whatever mic is at hand and just doing their best to get a decent recording. I've often had this discussion with students and novice recordists about what mic they should use when their options are far more limited. Many new recordists came into the studio from live experience, either as musicians, band members maybe, or live sound guys, club sound engineers, who cut their teeth with the more limited array of mics provided by the majority of music clubs, at least rock and pop music clubs. In fact, sometimes that array is simply a collection of the same mic model, and 9 times out of 10, that model is the Shure SM58, the classic club vocal mic, along with its close cousin, the SM57 instrument mic. In truth, it's really the same mic. The 58 just has the ball-type windscreen for vocal use, and 58s can, and do, handle just about any miking task in most clubs, although their primary application is as vocal mics for all the singers on stage. Many budding recording engineers naturally bring their stage miking experience with them to the studio, and, not surprisingly, when it comes to setting up a mic for the vocal, they stick to what they know. After all, it's served them well, sounding pretty good, despite probably taking a beating regularly. And since live vocals tend to cut through the stage mix reasonably well, why shouldn't the durable, old reliable 58 be just as good a choice for a vocal in the studio as well? Now, whenever I get into this discussion, I always feel the need to say, as I'm about to here, that I think the 58 is an excellent stage mic. It's reasonably well balanced, with a bit of a presence peak in the upper mids, just like most vocal mics have, including the really high-end studio models. And it does sound fairly clear on most vocals, provided the singer maintains at least a decent mic technique. Up close, as intended, but not completely swallowing the mic. But the sound of a 58, and not to single it out, this is the case with most club mics, doesn't possess the clarity and level of detail that a dedicated studio mic would. Now, fans of the 58 sometimes pull out frequency response graphs and point out that the response is not all that different from the published graphs of many pricier studio vocal mics. But as any studio tech would point out, mic response graphs don't really tell the full story. How a mic responds to signals around it, and how it responds to the more subtle aspects of the sound, like transients and air, have as much, if not more, to do with what those mics really sound like in actual use. The SM58 is a good dynamic mic, but again, like with most stage mics, its strengths are ruggedness and reliability, not clarity and detail. In a live situation, any subtle air or detail would be largely unnoticeable anyway in the loud, intense club environment. But if you capture a vocal performance in the studio and listen to it in that more exacting monitoring environment, or even over a typical good home stereo, what's lacking in most stage mics, as subtle as it may be, will be revealed. A more standard studio vocal mic would typically be a large diaphragm condenser rather than a dynamic, and that design, by its nature, usually provides a more detailed sound quality with better transient response, a somewhat more extended high and low end frequency response, and a more even off-axis response to the space around it, all of which contributes to a sense of openness and air, that sense of the voice being in a three-dimensional acoustic space, even when the acoustics are not overly roomy. That quality is hard to quantify, but when you hear it from a really good studio mic, it's unmistakable. That's why I suggest to live sound guys moving over to recording that they get the sound of some decent studio mics in their ears before simply settling for the familiar qualities of their favorite stage mic. Now, I have used stage mics for recording, and also done some mixes where the vocals were taken with a 58 or similar model, and I certainly was able to come up with a good mix and good sounding vocal tracks. But the vocal sound took a bit more work, with EQ and some delay effects, to help it hold its own against the mix. Had the arrangements been more sparse, I would have felt that lack of extra detail and air much more acutely when I was working on the mix. It was certainly noticeable every time I soloed the vocal tracks. So, while I hate to sound like a snob when it comes to mics, especially when I know very well that many people have to work within a seriously limited studio budget, I'd still say that at least one really good standard studio vocal condenser mic should be a must-have for anyone doing any serious vocal recording work. But with that said, what exactly constitutes a really good studio condenser? Like I said, I hate to be a mic snob, so how good is good enough? I'll get into that in the next video.